Thank you, Jo. Thank you, Victoria. We are delighted to be back at Lifting the Lid again this year, and to be participating in this great event. I'm Tracy, co-founder of whiteballoon, here with my colleague Amanda, co-founder. I don't know, for people who don't know whiteballoon, we're an online resource. We help people when they're planning a funeral or celebration of life, lots of information and inspiration. And we're delighted to be hosting this talk today. I think in the week where COP29 is taking place in Azerbaijan, and we've seen the reports from Europe with the extreme weather events and flooding, I think a lot of us are thinking about how our actions might make a difference and affect climate change. I think many individuals want to do their bit and businesses to reduce their carbon footprint and to tread more lightly on this wonderful planet of ours. We've seen quite a few changes in the last few years in the funeral sector, with the rise of direct cremation, an increasing interest in natural burial. And I think it's good to consider what we in the sector can do to support positive action and change. So today we're dipping our toes into the water of this sometimes confusing and complex subject, and we're hearing from 5 guest speakers who are making a difference at many different levels through information and education, in the way they run their businesses, and by creating beautiful biodegradable items for funerals. I think it's important to remember that over an entire lifetime, a funeral is a tiny part of a person's carbon footprint. And we must all accept and value each other's choices, end-of-life choices, whatever they may be. But when you think that over 600,000 people die each year in the UK, and there are many thousands of businesses supporting those people, even small changes by each and every one of us can make a huge difference. So I think, we're going to consider those things today. So I'll hand over to Amanda, who's going to introduce our wonderful speakers.
Thank you, Tracy. So our first speaker today is Sarah Jones. Sarah is an NHS doctor, and hi Sarah, and founder of Full Circle Funerals, an independent B Corp registered funeral directors. She also runs the Funeral Care Carbon Literacy Training course. Sarah, thank you for joining us today.
Hi everyone. Yes, thank you. I'm not currently still an NHS doctor. I would hate for you all to think that I was somehow managing to do all of those things that feels like a very long distant memory. But yeah, so lovely to see you all, and to see some faces that I know and haven't seen for a while. So hello, hi Rachel. And thank you to Amanda and Tracy for inviting me along. So my name's Sarah. I'm the founder and caretaker, I call myself now, of Full Circle Funerals. So we have a small, local funeral service up in Yorkshire. And I thought I would use my few minutes just to share a little bit about things that we have done as a business to try and have a positive impact and contribute to the changes that we need to make as a society to better care for our planet. I really want that. I speak as somebody who I don't come from a family or a place or a group of friends who naturally, I guess, was very focused on the planet. So I started my journey to want to understand this and do something about this a little while ago, but I still very much feel like, there is so much more to learn and do. So I'm not sitting here as an expert. I'm sitting here as someone who's just tried to do things as I've understood that they might be helpful, in the hope that it might, one or two things that maybe I can share might land and might feel like something that someone in the room can pick up and think, oh yeah, I could maybe do that too. And then slowly but surely that will mean we're all contributing to a really important tipping point in making sure we're doing the right thing. So I've got kind of 3 things I was just going to share. The first one is that I spent a long time feeling quite bewildered about what to do. It all seemed quite hard. I didn't really know. I kind of knew I needed to do something, but I didn't really know what that would look like. And for me, the thing that changed everything is when I started to measure. So when I started to measure the carbon that associated with what Full Circle was doing, that is when I finally felt that I had something tangible that I could look at, I could hold, I could understand, and I could then start to do something about. And I, again, assumed that the measuring piece would be really, really hard and tied myself up in knots. But actually, there are an awful lot of people who care about these things and who would be willing to help you if it's not something that you've already done. And in my experience, many people are happy to help you understand your scope 1 and how, or certainly how to measure it without necessarily that coming with a really big price tag. So my first tip, or something that worked really well for me, is just start to measure. So start to understand where your business or your activities or whatever hat it is that you're coming here with, start to understand where you're having an impact. And therefore, you can then start to think what you might do about it. So that is my tip number 1. Okay, the second thing I wanted to say is for anybody who would like to make a difference, I would a big difference for me was when I became part of a number of communities. And that meant that I was suddenly in the room with people who knew an awful lot more than I did about these things and were really happy to share what they knew. And there's the knowledge transfer and the understanding what best practice looks like, but there's also a really big validation piece there, which was really important to me. So I can see, as if by magic, coming up in the chat box is so one of the communities that we are now members of, which has been a huge part of our journey, is we became a certified B Corp just over 3 years ago. And that meant that we suddenly became part of a B Corp community. Haven't got the time to kind of discuss what that is for those of you that don't know, but definitely have a little look. But what that meant, I was suddenly in a room with people who are doing these things and are taking actions. They're thinking about their supply chains. They're thinking about how they run their operations. They're thinking about their people. They're thinking about how they involve their teams so that decision making can be better informed, and that every single person in the decision is including the planet when they're making in the organization, is including the planet when they're making their decisions. So I would definitely encourage people to think about joining a community of some sort so that you are having these meaningful conversations. So for me, it was the B Corp. And the other thing that I have done, which I've found really, really helpful, is I've set up a local People Planet Pint. So I'm sure some of you will have heard of People Planet Pint, but it's a big, see, now I'm going to see how quickly Tracy and Amanda get the link to People Planet Pint unprompted into the chat box. But that's it's a global initiative, I guess I'll call it, where local communities just set up an evening a month where you go and have a pint, and the pint is funded, so they pay for the pint. So, you know, let's not knock it. And the idea is that people come together and share on what's going on locally. So it's really informal. But again, it's meant that we've got a nice local community of many businesses and many people who come and share what's happening locally, which means you can kind of tap in. And it's so easy to set up. So if there isn't one where you are locally, you just become a host, and it's super easy. They talk you through it. So I'd recommend. So that's the community piece. So 1, measure; 2, become part of a community. And then the third thing I just wanted to really briefly mention is that the importance of data. And one of the things that I found really challenging in running a funeral business and trying to share information with the people that we support about green funeral choices is that I found it really hard to have the data to inform what I was telling people. And I think it'd be fair to say that that is still hard. And in every industry, the data is well, I guess available to varying degrees, but in funeral care still we're very much at the first part of that journey to understand what the carbon impact or environmental impact, but carbon associated with each different funeral choice is. So we crowdfunded £20,000, and an environmental consultancy led a project to try and understand what data was already available about the carbon associated with coffins and current committal options in the UK. So I will put a link in the chat for anybody who's interested in finding out more about that. It is massively flawed. It is absolutely just the first little step into a massive subject. It's had a huge amount of criticism, which I completely support. So it's absolutely not the finished article, but hopefully it is the start. And my hope is that someone will pick it up. So if you're in the room, to be that guy or gal, but my hope is that someone will pick it up and say, no, we need better data, and we'll then take it forward, and then that can inform all of our choices. So I'll put the link in. And yes, the only last thing to say, I hope I'm still at my 10 minutes, is that in order to try and be part of the solution, we've had some carbon literacy training for funeral care accredited by the Carbon Literacy Project. So huge kudos to Georgie Hopkins, who you can see, because without her, I would never have got to that point. So we now have carbon literacy training for funeral care professionals, and my hope is then if people come to that, and again, Brendan and Carolyn in the room, early adopters, so thank you, they came to the first training. But if we can get as many people within funeral care carbon literate, then I think the change will happen naturally, or certainly be expedited. So I shall stop talking now. I'll put some links in the chat. Thank you very much. Feel free to follow up if you've got questions, and see you at the end.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. That was really insightful. So thank you very much. And I know Tracy did your carbon literacy training course recently, and she found it really interesting. And I'm looking forward to doing it in your next one, January, February, when the next one is. So thank you very much. So our next speaker is Sophia Campbell-Shaw. Sophia is founder of Woven Farewell Coffins. She makes beautiful willow coffins using locally sourced willow. And she's very passionate about ecological practices and also the growing movement towards family-centric funerals. Sophia, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much. And Sarah, it's an honour to follow you. Thank you so much for all of that amazing information. Sarah is creating serious waves, and it's fun to follow along. And as I'm sure a lot of people here in different scales are creating waves. So I run Woven Farewell Coffins. I'm a small scale willow coffin maker in the UK. There's probably about 10 of us, small cottage industries, and there's 4 big willow coffin companies. So willow coffins are probably the biggest in the UK, I'd say, around the world. And I've been running it for 6 years, and it's a really exciting time because, as a few people have mentioned so far, there seems to be a bit of a sea change, and it's really about time in the funeral sector towards more openness and open eyes around different options and what we can do, and not necessarily being as tied down to what appears to be respectful and traditional, and realizing that there's so many different ways to be respectful. And so I'm just going to say a little bit about my story and what I do, but I also the first thing I wanted to say, that building on what Sarah said, is pre-planning, and probably a lot of people in this room are already aware, but I just wanted to highlight it, that when we're thinking about making ecological funeral choices, it's really an imperative to create some sort of funeral plan in advance, to kind of have the time to think about before we get ill, or before we've died, to have a bit of more of considered time to research options. And yeah, I think that's something that a lot of people are focusing on a lot more now, but still there's that hilarious and also very understandable kind of feeling around, if I think about my death in a very specific way, then somehow it might bring it on, or I think that's quite an unconscious belief, actually, that a few people have spoken about, or just doesn't feel it just doesn't feel comfortable, does it? So just advocating for pre-planning. So I've been running the business for 6 years, and we sell all around the country to funeral directors and to families, and most coffins are not available direct to families in the UK. Most coffins you can only buy through funeral directors, but there's a little bit of a cheeky upswell of people running coffin businesses or making coffins in communities, and shrouds, by the way. Shrouds are part of this picture, sorry, Yuli, to sell directly to families and have a really special opportunity for families to be more involved, maybe to to come and weave. I'd often have families come and weave either for the whole 4 or 5 days, and it's a pretty special process. You really get to know someone well when you're weaving a coffin for them or someone that's just died, or just a couple of hours. And I think the same with shrouds. And we live in a culture in the West, most of the places in the West, where there is, I don't know if anyone's heard about this meaning crisis that we're in. Last year, there was a survey done, and 90% of people in the UK reported a lack of meaning. And that there's many reasons for that, but it's really interesting thinking about how that applies to the funeral sector, and how a lot of the changes that we've seen in recent years, excuse me, have been around bringing more meaning in. And so as a small scale coffin maker, that's my little part I can play in helping someone have a meaningful way of connecting with the coffin, and in that if they've seen seen videos of the making process, which I always try and do for people who can't come in person, there's a different relationship with the coffin, where people often report less anxiety or apprehension when they've been around the coffin. It's a bit more of a familiar object, and I think that's something that used to be a lot more commonplace, and it's really lovely to see it come in a bit more again into our Western culture. So I have a willow from Somerset, and all the materials that we use are biodegradable. We use cornstarch plastic as our lining. Probably almost all of the coffins, all of the 600,000 coffins that are used every year have plastic that isn't biodegradable. So that's a little thing that I can do and advocate for. And there are other alternative options to having a lining that is compostable that Yuli might touch on. And yeah, we use hemp rope, so it's all very tactile. It's all great for cremation as well as burial. And I have, I think, as a small person with a certain amount of social media presence, although we sell probably like 4 coffins a month, what we can do is I feel like a place that I have is sharing information into ordinary spaces, which is kind of similar to Sarah, but kind of occupying different realms. So that's a bit about what I do, and thank you so much for listening. I think I'm going to stop there.
Okay.
But I look forward to any questions that people have at the end.
Sophia, thank you very much. And you're absolutely right about the point you made about planning ahead. I think there's definitely been a movement towards, we've definitely seen a change over the last few years that people are becoming more open to that. But as you said, there's a long way to go. But thank you so much. And actually, Sophia does willow weaving courses as well, workshops. I went down and joined her on one of them, but which was, it was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Sophia. So our next speaker is Claire Lyons. Claire, thank you for joining us today. She is a bereaved parent and writer, and she works with the Woodland Burial Company, who run the beautiful Grambles Wood burial ground, natural burial ground. And she helps them to create the most deepest positive impact in the work that they do. Thank you, Claire, for joining us today.
Good morning. Well, good morning here. I'm delighted by the truly international audience we have today, because I think the most powerful thing about this entire conference or festival is that we're having these conversations, because wherever you stand and wherever you're starting, it's the power of talking about these things that's been missing for a little while, I think, and us having these conversations allows us to just bring to the fore, I suppose, all of the amazing work being done around the world, and acknowledging those differences, as Sophia did, in how we manage death and dying, because it is, we are all very different, and I think that's very important, actually. So I wanted to be as brief as possible, because once I start, I'm a lecturer, and so I'm afraid I do have like a 2-hour is my sort of natural thing, which I promise to keep to 5 minutes if I can. So I thought I'd look at how the business is trying to be environmentally positive, and then how we're trying to support families to be environmentally positive. And I guess if you're looking at a natural burial option, you're already kind of a little bit further down the line than a lot of people. In my own situation, I considered myself, I was running an environmental family website, so I thought I was pretty green. I thought I knew it all. But I had never done a funeral because one doesn't do many of them in life. And so it came as a genuine shock to me that I didn't know. In that moment, I really needed to know. And in a moment when I didn't really have the capacity to do a lot of deep research, I didn't know what would be the best or the greenest option. And so we tried to therefore support families, hopefully in advance, as Sophia suggested, to think through those options, and look at the individual aspects of end of life, death, dying, and after, and think about, what the research tells us, what their feelings are, what their family history is, all the different elements of decision making. We do have quite a few rules at Woodland Burial Company, so you can't do anything. And we have some of our own environmental kind of standards and boundaries, but within that, we are incredibly flexible. And our main priority is making sure that family in their bereavement are able to reflect and represent and celebrate their person in the way that's best for them, and how what they need as an individual family. And we've had a really broad range. So we've had unattended funerals with only members of staff, and we've had a full male Welsh voice choir. And we've people genuinely within the realms of our environmental rules can pretty much do what they like. And we also try to impact the wider community. So we do lots of talks, and sort of engage with other community groups who might be, well, we should all be thinking about these things, shouldn't we? So hopefully that's available to everyone. We're very popular with the WI, which I'm glad because I'm a member. And we also try to impact in the community in our practice as well. So as well as supporting families to make perhaps more informed choices and trying to educate in a general sense, we have a wildlife management plan and those sorts of things. We also try as a business to be as environmentally positive as we can be. And Sarah's mentioned some really great ways to do that. To add on to those, things like we encourage all of our staff to be on Geeky Zero, which is a great app if you want to try it, to manage their own, their family environmental impact as well as the workplace one. We try to be environmental in our practice. We have an eco tank printer, and we use a green stationery company and recycle paper and local printers and that sort of thing. We generally use the Sustainable Development Goals as our kind of roadmap of decision making, and they're not purely environmental. And we don't touch on all of them in our business, but they're a nice guide of, how could we impact these very significant global goals to be more sustainable, and they help us sometimes to pick one service over another, or to make those sorts of choices. We also have a partnership with a UK company called Ecology. I never know if I say that correctly. And that's a tree planting, which some people are surprised by because we own a woodland. So we kind of had trees covered, but we can't possibly plant enough trees within Granville's Wood that would live and be sustainable, that we would like to. And so part of our programme is also to plant through this partnership across the globe and also in the UK, because it's about the right tree in the right place. So tree planting is a bit of a interesting topic to get into. And we do produce an impact report to kind of think about what we've done. And that's a lovely way. And I do that as a family as well. That's a really lovely way to reflect on sort of where you've been and where you've come from and where you're going and what you might want to tackle next. And I think it is, as Sarah said, an idea of movement. It's better than, we're doing better than we were last year. And I think it's lovely to feel that progress. There's always more to do, but rather than being overwhelmed by that, it's trying to sort of enjoy that you've made that movement and feel positive about making the next one. So we try to do a bit of both. We try to support families and support as a business, support our environmental practice. And then I think it's about coming back to Sarah again, research. Most of our research we do is under the ground, which is in some ways the hardest one to do. And we work with that's a global piece of research. We have a science team. We're part of a bigger group. And that's really fascinating, the impact of all sorts of different practices and what's going on under the ground that obviously ultimately affects everything above, has opened my eyes and changed a lot of my understanding of this whole area of the funeral sector. I think it's a really interesting topic, but one for another day. So I will wait for questions. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Claire. Lots to think about, both as individuals and as businesses. So thank you very much. And you're so right about the movement and the steps we can all take just to keep moving in the right direction. So thank you very much. And next we have Yuli, Somme. Yuli is a textile artist and founder of Bellacouche. At her workshop in Devon, she makes beautiful wool felt shrouds and urns using the wool from the local flocks down there. So Yuli, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for organising this. And it just feels fantastic to be given this opportunity to speak this morning. Yes, I've already made some notes from Claire and Sarah and Sophia that are coming up, and I think we all find this very inspiring. So my background is in textiles, wool to be precise, first as a spinner, weaver and natural dyer, then as a felt maker. I am a crafter and lover of genuine materials, whether it's wool, hemp, flax, wood, clay, anything that comes from the region that I live in. I believe that sourcing your materials as locally as possible is a good thing for humans and the environment. Taking nature as our inspiration, guide and teacher is our best option for the future. So I started with thinking about the cycle of life back in the last century, the way that we as a species have taken it upon ourselves to tinker with this natural cycle. The cycle of life, nature, is a continuum from birth through living to death. If you like Spring Watch, I recommend episode 6 of this year, 2024, where a speeded up film of a dead squirrel is shown being cycled back to the earth. It really is a magnificent and good thing to watch. There was no plastic lined coffin, no fire, no embalming, no pollution. It was just the myriad of creatures in the bed of the forest that gather and dance to a tune of time itself to transform this squirrel back into soil, which then feeds the trees and vegetation surrounding it. In our messy human emotions and relationships within society, we have turned this process of decay after death into a chain of complication, which I personally find troubling and very heavy on the embedded carbon. The death of a loved one brings out our innate ability to tell stories about this person and their connection to the people gathered. We can momentarily remove ourselves from busy modern living and reflect on our own story, our mortality, and what the loss of a loved one means. I often hear people say, we are stardust. And there is poetic beauty in this for our dead to be burnt and our particles to enter the skies, the heavens. And this is the story that we have gone with throughout the last century. In the light of human effects on planet Earth, loss of biodiversity, pollution of air, sea and land, is it time to reimagine our stories and our place on the earth by including ourselves as part of nature, not apart from nature? And Sarah Jones's recent report concludes that a natural burial in a shroud has the least impact on the environment rather than by any other method. I should just mention here that Sophia and I have collaborated a bit in the past, and that's something that I think is wonderful about our little community of independent coffin makers and shroud makers, is this idea that we can collaborate. I made my first shroud in 1999, and I was inspired by the 1667 Burial in Wool Act, which decreed that the dead must be buried in wool. It was enacted to keep the wool industry thriving at a time of commercial turbulence in Europe. Wool is the only fibre that we still grow and process on a commercial scale within the UK shores. It is a marvellous, beautiful fibre, very versatile. And I'd love to go into this in more depth, but that has to be on a different occasion, I think. Suffice to say, I make my shrouds from organic, certified British wool, grown and processed in the UK. Felt is a non-woven, it's a primitive and simple fabric involving the tangling of the fibres to form a strong, thick mat. Felt enfolds and floats over a body rather than hugging it, which is less challenging to our sanitized modern sensibilities than a body hugging thin woven wrap. The leaf cocoon can be described as something between a coffin and a shroud. The shroud itself is supported by an integrated wooden frame, which I make here from local sustainably sourced wood, and it has 3 sets of handles, and it weighs less than a third of a conventional coffin. A burial in a sealed coffin traps air. Decomposition is slowed down and takes years to complete. There are synthetic materials in the majority of modern coffins which cannot be consumed by the soil organisms and therefore cause similar problems to the microplastic pollution in our oceans. But a body buried in natural fabrics will have direct contact with the soil. There are no air pockets, and composting begins straight away. Contrary to the popular vision of soil being dirty, dirt, as it's called in the USA, I believe it is the ultimate cleaner and our best hope for the future. Cremation is undoubtedly our most popular choice for dealing with our mortal remains currently. It's readily available and we are running out of traditional burial spaces. But have we run out of imagination? Can we reimagine every community in the UK or even globally having at least one natural burial ground? And what would this look like? There's a very good example of an old Victorian cemetery in the heart of Bristol. And I see there's people here from Bristol, so I'd love to hear any comments from you. Which has been wrested from development, and part of it has become a natural burial ground. Effectively, the whole site is a wonderful green space in an urban setting, enjoyed by local people, families with children. The benefits of green spaces in our urban areas goes without saying. I'm sure you're all aware of them. We can bury people in agricultural land as well. These spaces can be set aside for people and nature, creating woodland or permanent pasture, wildflower meadow preferably, or be integrated into the farming cycle, especially when livestock is involved. And silvopastoralism, where livestock are grazed in avenues of fruit-producing trees, is one possibility that has multiple benefits. So coming back to the shrouds that I make, I love the actuality that many of my customers enjoy a participatory involvement in creating something beautiful by gathering and contributing with expressions of love and beauty, decorating a felt cover for the shroud of a loved one, taking time in conversation, reflection, laughter, tears, and all the sticky emotions we feel. I call this making with intent. So I think, you know, Sophia's mention of meaning, I think this is something that us independent makers are getting very good at doing. And I'd love to hear people's comments about these options.
Thank you very much, Yuli. Thank you, and your shrouds are beautiful, and thank you. Lots of things to think about there. And I'm going to move on to Brendan Day, and he's Brendan and Carolyn, a husband and wife, and they're founders of the Greener Globe Funeral Standards, a sustainability audit scheme for the funeral sector. And it encourages businesses to be mindful of their own actions and also how they can take steps to minimise their own environmental impact. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having us. And first of all, I just want to say it is wonderful to be meeting with you all, the speakers, the people who've created this wonderful space, and also everyone who's taking part, because you're all playing a really vital role. Because I can go back to when I started in 1980, when we'd embraced modernism. We could cut more and more grass with bigger and bigger lawnmowers using vast quantities of petrol and diesel. We didn't have anything like natural burial. We didn't see wicker coffins from one decade to the next. We never saw felt. There was no choice with funerals. And at the crematorium, we knew families wanted a 20-minute slot, 3 an hour, and that we could have all the cremators running full pelt using all our fossil fuel. And now look how far we've come. Whether it's Sophie and Yuli offering us different types of coffins, or I've seen our friends from Parley Green are on today. There's Claire offering Woodland. There's Sarah offering a new type of funerals. So we have, over the last 40 years, from my own lived experience, I know we've gone a fantastic way. And really, that's what we're here for with our Greener Globe Funeral Standard. We want to support the sector to move forward. And we do that by setting a standard and then supporting, whether it's funeral directors, to achieve that standard. And then we then like to promote them so everybody knows, so we can encourage more funeral directors to look greener and more sustainable. And we do that fundamentally through an audit, a pragmatic, evidenced audit of their business, looking at all aspects of their business to see where they're achieving that higher standard. We realise that downstream from them, there are all their suppliers. So we introduced another standard for the funeral sector, and that's for suppliers. So then we can reduce the carbon that's going into that funeral and to the funeral directors. And also now we also have the downstream basis with the crematorium, because until a new system replaces cremation, and the cremation is now dominant at over 80%, that is where huge, as we've heard, huge amounts of carbon are being produced. But that can be reduced if we can encourage hydrogen, electricity, or even just using the current process more efficiently. The amount of gas that's being used can be halved at many sites. So we encourage that through our cremation standard. And lastly, because I know I'm running out of time, we've been asked to produce a cemetery standard, a burial ground standard. So we're working on that now with a number of sites, including Claire's. And with that, the focus isn't so much on carbon, even though there's sequestration of carbon in the trees and in the soil. We recognise that, but it's more about biodiversity and habitat diversity. So we're encouraging that through our standard. So we're promoting wherever we can, everyone in that chain to produce a greener and more sustainable funeral. So I'll let you. I'll pause there. Otherwise, I'll start to go on forever.
No, thank you, Brendan. It's brilliant the work that you're doing, and we're delighted that White Balloon's got our bronze Greener Globe award. So thank you. No, it's fantastic the work you're doing. Victoria's going to just read through some of the questions, and then I'll wrap up and say a big thank you to everyone. So Victoria, do you want to just read out questions? Yes.
Let me just.
Thank you, Brendan.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. That was amazing. Well, someone has already answered this, but it's human composting in the UK, which I think I can probably answer that. It's not, is it? But
it's not, but there are lots of companies working towards it. So I do think it's something that will happen extremely quickly. Yeah, I think it's coming.
Fantastic. That was Tina. Yeah, Tina wanted to know that.
I just saw one, Victoria, where someone says, is it truly global standards or just UK at the moment? Brendan, your UK standards at the moment, yes?
It is, but yes, it's throughout the UK. It's in all parts of the UK. And we've also got 3 clients now in Holland.
Tina's asked, I've heard the body needs to biodegrade for 9 months. So this adds to the fact that cremation could be quite disastrous.
Can I say something about that?
Of course.
I think, people are always very concerned about how long it takes for a body to break down. That's the question, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
And that is very dependent on the local conditions. So it's dependent on the soil, the microbes in the soil locally, and how deep it is.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Sorry. Oh, question for Sarah Jones, full circle. I'm a former transport researcher and advocate. This is Juliet. I'm a former transport researcher and advocate of sustainable transport. One of the challenges is sustainable access to burial sites and crematoriums and issues with parking at cemeteries, as they're not always on adequate public transport routes. So people just get in their cars. Is sustainable transport something you consider in your planning? That's to Sarah, if she can answer.
Yeah. So hi. Yeah. So ultimately, what the report showed and what I think works well as a good frame for thinking is that the total carbon or impact of a funeral is just the sum of each individual choice, which makes something that feels really overwhelming actually chunk down into, well, if you just think about each decision that you need to make and think about the carbon associated with that decision, then actually that makes it much more manageable. So yes, absolutely. As Juliet said, transport is really key. So I replied in the thing, but yeah, so it's the transport to the service location, transport to the committal location, transport to the refreshments, but then probably more significantly, if somebody is going to have a memorial location that's really significant, that's at distance, and then after a funeral travel repeatedly to that location at distance in a really big car, then that's going to, over the course of many years and decades, that's actually going to have quite a significant cumulative impact of the travel associated with that, with going to that memorial location. So one of the things that we do for people who are happy to talk about it is we share that actually when you're thinking about how to maintain those positive continuing bonds post-funeral, if some of the options are more sustainable than others, and I guess avoiding repeated travel in order for that ritual activity is better from a carbon perspective. I know some reports have, I guess, said that burial grounds, people are more likely to go back. I don't think there's necessarily hard evidence that supports that. So that's again one of the questions. But I think lots of people where we live love going to Whitby. That's a seaside place. If you keep going there twice a year as part of a memorial activity, that starts to add up from a transport. But yeah, transport is huge, isn't it, in this conversation? So the part that transport plays in funerals is absolutely really significant. So yes, we try to talk about it. So we have an electric fleet that people can choose, which I appreciate is not perfect because of the mining and the batteries, but yeah. So yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much. And I just wanted to there's a comment actually Yuli has answered in the chat, but it's just quite interesting about being degradable is not the same as compostable. Degradable plastic, for instance, does not break down in the soil. Make sure any materials are at least biodegradable, if not compostable. compostable. I mean, I don't know if Yuli wanted to, because that, I don't know, just that's quite interesting because lots of people may go for the wrong option.
Yeah, there is confusion because when all the talks, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago about bringing, banning plastic bags and all that, a lot of shops started supplying degradable bags, which are even worse than plastic because normal plastic stays whole.
Okay.
Whereas degradable plastic shatters into tiny microplastics. So you need to make sure that it's at least biodegradable, and there's confusion over some, there are different definitions about what is biodegradable, I believe. Compostable is the best. But I'm so glad to hear that, I've forgotten who it was, Brendan maybe, saying that, carbon literacy, I don't know who it was who said that, carbon literacy is, I'm going to go on that course because there is so much nuance about materials. And I think there is a lot of ignorance within the funeral industry generally. This is a generalization about what materials are actually being used, especially inside coffins. And we need that clarity. We need to understand it.
Thank you. I don't know, we've got like about sort of 4 or 5 minutes till we then need to sort of wrap up and start moving people into the waiting room. But I don't know if anyone wanted to actually, any questions that I might have missed, if anyone wanted to quickly come on screen.
If I could just say, I think in this field there is, following on what Yuli said, there's a lack of research across the whole of the sector. And I don't know if anyone knows about research that's going on, but we'd be really interested to hear about it. Someone mentioned research in Australia and we factored it up in the chat. But if anyone knows about other research that is going on, we'd always be interested to hear, because I think that's what's sorely needed. It's expensive, it's time consuming, but hopefully people are starting to do it so we can all have a bit more clarity and understand the information we're giving to people, whether it's correct and what it should be. So I think just a call out for the sector to just try and do more research across these areas, I think.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm trying to see.
Yeah, may I just jump in? Sorry, I did have a question actually. Claire, I think you mentioned research about what happens underground. Can you share a little bit more about that, please?
Yes, I didn't. I'm always conscious of moving off topic and that not being helpful when there's so much going on in this festival. So Woodland Burial Company is owned by the Faunus Group, and it was started by someone who whose father died, and he was just really unhappy with the sort of traditional options that his mum was given, and they didn't represent his dad in any way. And I think people do feel huge pressure from the traditional options that, that's all you can have. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I remember being told, can you bring in some clothes for your son? And it didn't occur to me to say, does he need them? Is that essential? Do you know what I mean? Actually, environmentally, that's a disaster. And so I think we're sort of asked questions or told to do things and we go along with it. So it was quite a powerful experience for Simon Holden. And from that came this desire to really pull apart the industry and start again and say, actually, how do we do this? What do we have to do? And what's the impact? So the Faunus Group have 3 businesses that have grown completely organically. It started with Woodland Burial. And as part of Woodland Burial, we looked at what happens, what are we doing to this local environment when we bury ashes, when we inter ashes, when we inter whole body, what's happening under the ground. And we got involved with an organisation, a company in America, who also, if you watch CSI, the body farm, the famous body farm. So we've been in touch and we're working with, as part of a bigger science project, to look at this research and to see what the impact of different materials, different depths, different all sorts of things. And the research that came out fastest was on cremation remains, and they're essentially just disastrous. And so from that came, how are we going to manage that? and there's a product available which is a soil, an organic soil, that helps to change and impact cremation ashes to make them safe. And the next stage of that is, can we use that soil for full human composting? And the answer is yes, and that's a piece of research being done by a company called Precision Organic. So it does take time. The problem is it's massively expensive, and no one wants to fund it because it's not very glamorous. So it's individual people funding this, and it's mortgages and that kind of thing on the line. So it's taking far longer than we would all like it to. But it is essential. We need that basis of science. We need that factual basis. I think there's a lot of hook'em in and around, and I think we suffer. You know, as soon as I mention the word woodland, people will say, "Oh yeah, but you've always been a hippie," you know, and it has this sort of quite. It can have a slightly negative connotation of people worried about the environment. There's a certain personality type, and I think we need to move away from that and say, actually, this is the science. You know, this isn't just a feeling I have inside. This is something very practical, and I'm taking that further. I'm starting a PhD on the benefits of nature in grief, because I also think that is science-based. I don't think that's just a happy feeling. So there is lots going on, and I'm more than happy to chat outside of here, but it is taking time and it is incredibly expensive.
Fantastic. Thank you, Claire. So we sort of, I don't know if Amanda, if you wanted to, or Tracy wanted to add anything at the end before we...
Well, I just want to say thank you to all the speakers. You know, we're passionate about letting families know of the different options so they can make choices that feel right for them and those they love. So thank you so much for sharing your insights and your expertise today. It's been really, really interesting and helpful. And thank you to Victoria, and thank you to Joe Douglas as well for all your hard work with lifting the lid, and good luck over the next few days, and all the volunteers as well. I know there's lots of volunteers as well, and thank you. This is our 3rd year doing Lifting the Lid, so thank you for including us in it as well. Yeah, and I hope you'll have a lovely weekend.
Thank you so much. I've just put in the chat links to the Lifting the Lid links as well for the merchandise, and for just our GoFundMe page. Just if you wanted to add anything in there, or to buy some nice merchandise. But